I'm watching him run ahead of me, and I'm trying to catch up, and it's just not working. And the train actually went by us, and we weren't too far away at this time.
Yeah.
But it went by us, got to the next station, but I'm probably 50 yards behind him.
Sure.
And I look up, and he's running with his hands just high up in the air. He's like, yeah, this is awesome. And I just busted out laughing. And, it was, like I say, because even though I was cold, I was tired, I was hungry, we were out late, and we still had a ways to go once we caught the train to get to our apartment. But, that just changed my perspective of, you can find happiness in even those weird, absurd moments.
Yeah. Okay, well, welcome, Dana. To the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Can I call you Matt? Or should I call you Matty?
Whichever you want.
I think I'll stick with Matt.
Matt? Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, I like that. I'm used to that.
Yeah, that's a good one. We're Tanya. You throw Tanya. I'm not wearing the coveralls, though, so it's not really the same.
Well, do we get to share the backstory, though? Can we at least explain it?
Yeah, please.
All right. So, first year that Matt, a.k.a. Matty, came to work for me here at the Centennial Lube, he was prepared. He brought his own coveralls that I think he found off the rack at DI or something.
Goodwill.
Goodwill.
Something. Yeah.
Even had a name printed on the chest here. And I looked at it, and it was Hispanic names. Like, is that Quintana? Or is that an Enya? That's Quintana. And Quintana soon turned into Tanya.
Tanya.
As the nickname around the shop.
Yep. It's been the nickname ever since.
Yep.
There's no escaping it. Yeah. Hey, those coveralls have been very useful.
They've gotten dirty.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you made good use of them.
I cleaned the sump in them. Is that what it's called?
Which, yes. And I need to have Mitch probably do that at some point. That's a rite of passage.
Yeah, everyone needs to clean the sump once.
Yeah, absolutely. And I need to clean the sump as little as possible.
Yeah. True. That's pretty gross. So Dana, I appreciate you letting me take up some time and have you on the podcast. And obviously I was up in the area, so we're not in the typical studio, but nonetheless.
It's the glory of Centennial Lube.
Yeah. It's a good backdrop. It's a good change. And, I guess my first question would be, and obviously this is just highly conversational and we can take the conversation wherever we want, but I'm curious, you've been a business owner for, I don't know how many years, probably.
Well, technically owning this business for about 12 years.
12 years.
But prior involvement goes back way farther than that. Right.
So at least like 20 years, you'd say, something like that?
Well, we opened this shop in 1990. It was when the parents bought this location, and I moved over with them from where we were at before, and so I've been involved with it from the beginning, at least here.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's the thing I'm curious about is what's it like running a small business and being involved in the day-to-day operations? And I just think there's like so many things that I think people hear all the time, like, oh, start a business. That's like so cool. It'd be fun to be involved. And obviously there are a lot of cool, fun parts about it. But as someone who lives it every day, works a business every day, what's some of the highlights? What's some of the lessons you've learned? And obviously that's kind of a vast question, but maybe we can explore there and go from that.
Well, I mean, obviously you don't just walk home and, turn off the lights and forget about everything.
Right.
The job goes with you, even if your family doesn't want it to. Sometimes it does. It's a lot of hours, a lot of time, especially at the level that we are right now. I mean, it's a small operation, but because it's a small town, but we draw from a large area, and so there's a lot of work that comes in by word of mouth or repeat business, and so we stay pretty busy. And so it turns into 14, 15-hour days during the week. Luckily, we do decide that we can take a couple days for ourselves, so the weekend we stay closed. But it's satisfying in the sense that you can come and you can use the skills that you've learned over the years to help people who come in and say, I've got such and such problem, and can you help me? And a lot of times it's just, oh yeah, that's just a little change, and no big deal to us, but they're struggling with it, and that makes it for them very worthwhile, and they come back.
Yeah. how'd you get into mechanics and that? I know obviously Grandpa, your dad, for everyone watching, we're related. He's my uncle.
If you didn't know.
If you didn't know. The title will give that away. But obviously he was pretty heavily involved in mechanics. That was kind of his bread and butter, his career most of his life, obviously driving bus, but then but how did you get into mechanics and what kind of spurred that for you?
Honestly, when I was littler, I mean, Dad invited me to come learn a little bit more as he was doing things at the house. Wasn't really interested as a 10-year-old in doing that. But Mom and Dad always kept us all really busy doing different things. And so the real reason why where I gained more of an interest in starting with the small engine stuff was I took a stab at working for some local farmers, and it really wasn't my preferred method of employment. Yeah. And so one year when I kind of felt like, I didn't really want to do that again, I asked Dad if he wouldn't be interested in, maybe let me work with him. And because he was busy there at the house. I mean, the driveway was full of lawnmowers and, small engines for different things. And he had a lot to do. So, and he was willing to let me start. And so I did that pretty much all through high school. Started doing that when I was 14 with him. And did that through my high school years. And after leaving and graduating from college and coming back, this is where I ended up. Yeah.
What? Tell me a little bit more about the farming experience, because I don't think a lot of people don't necessarily, unless you live in a community like this, you probably haven't had a farming experience. And granted, most farms are getting so big now, there's not necessarily those type of jobs. But what was that like? What did you not like? What was kind of interesting about it?
Well, it was the main thing that I ever did for a farmer, because I was a young age, so it's not like I was out driving tractors and doing some of those things that might have been more interesting to even a teenager. Sure. I was pretty much just labor, physical labor, which at that time involved moving sprinkler pipe for the most part. And there was 2 or 3 years that I did it with my brothers, who were also employed at the same farmer. And the last year was a year that my next oldest brother, your dad, he graduated, went on his mission. And so I was there pretty much through the summer by myself. Yeah. And picked up his hand lines and his, different things. And so that year was, there was a lot of pipe moving. And it was just decided it wasn't the labor. I mean, didn't mind that, but it was, just felt like that was all that they were asking me to do. Didn't really extend me to come and learn much else. Yeah. And there was a lot of pipes, so it took me a long time. Maybe they felt like I wasn't,
utilizing your time as well as you
maybe
wanted.
Yeah,
something
maybe
like
that's what it was.
Yeah.
But good people. I mean, still good friends to this day. But yeah, just wasn't what I didn't see myself. My 5-year plan at that time was not to continue there.
Weren't sure how you could learn more from moving more pipe.
Yeah, moving more pipe. I figured like I had that skill down. Yeah. And just needed to do something else.
Yeah. Could you explain a little bit like what exactly like a line of pipe it means? Because I remember being explained that early on from my dad about a line of pipe, and I always thought it was like one line was one pipe. And that's not the case, apparently.
No, I mean, because most fields in the area will have about a 1/4 mile long string of pipe. Yeah. Whether it be a wheel line that has an engine that can kind of roll itself. Right. Or whether it be hand lines that you pick up each pipe one at a time that's maybe 25 feet long, something like that. Yeah. And you pick it up, carry it, whatever the distance is between that and the next move. It's maybe 30 to 40 feet, something I guess. And it's just a lot of zigzagging back and forth across the field, carrying one pipe at a time. Yeah. For a 1/4 mile. And then you walk back to the end of where the pipe hooks up, turn the line on, make sure it pressures up, that all the sprinklers sprinkle, none of them are plugged, and then you move to the next one. And that's 3 times a day, at least in potatoes. In grain, it's maybe twice a day, or in alfalfa, it's twice a day.
Jeez. So a lot of like just getting up, moving,
move pipe, get done, especially in the potatoes, you go back at 1 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, first move, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, then 9 o'clock at night. Jeez. And then repeat again the next day.
Yeah, doesn't sound like a very fun job.
And like I say, I enjoyed it more when my brothers were there.
Sure.
Of course. But yeah, once it was just me by myself, then it was kind of like you kind of counting the days till summer's over, or at least until the crops mature enough that you don't have to move them anymore. And that, grain matures a little sooner than the potatoes do.
Yeah.
And so, halfway through the summer or a little bit late in the summer, that goes away, and then you're just back down to just the potatoes if you're in our area.
Yeah. So when you worked on the farm and started helping Grandpa with the mechanics, working with your dad on the mechanics, and then what led you to pursue it after that? I know you mentioned you went to college. Did you go to college and do mechanics and engineering? What was kind of your focus in college?
No, my major in college was actually business information systems.
Okay, yeah.
With a double major in Russian.
Oh yeah.
And so it wasn't anything to do with mechanics or anything like that. One of the main reasons why I came back, at least at that time, was my dad had a health scare right at the time that I graduated from BYU.
Yeah.
And knew that he would not be able to really do much here around the shop that summer.
Yeah.
And I figured I'll come home and kind of help out and at least get him through a rough patch. Did some interviewing with other companies after, when I graduated.
Sure.
And I don't know, there just really wasn't anything else that I came across that felt as good as being here.
Yeah.
So.
And what about being here? Was it because one thing that we've talked about a little bit is like just the nature of kind of problem solving, helping the customer, and in a community like this, like that goes a really long ways as that customer service. You probably have experienced that more than anyone else, but what is that customer experience like? And what about working here was like, man, this is a good, I like this.
Well, I think honestly that part of it has developed, the appreciation of that part of it has developed more over time.
Sure.
As far as feeling like, you're helping somebody out.
Yeah.
When I was first here, it was probably, just mostly loyalty to family.
Sure.
To, show appreciation for, everything that my parents had done for me and wanting to be able to give back to them at that time.
Absolutely.
After, like I say, after his health got better and everything, it just became more, settled.
Yeah.
That, I was here, and then this was where it felt good. I mean, and then there was other things I was involved with in the community besides just here. There was the Performing Arts Center down in here in town that brought in different performers every month.
Yeah.
So I did lights and sound for that. Just learned some new skills there. That's one of the things that I guess I've liked. Same thing with the 3D printing. Why I get involved with this is something new to learn. Something it's continuing education, I guess. Yeah. Learning new skills throughout life.
Yeah. Well, and that's the one thing, like, I know you've talked about kind of these different things, the ability to learn and almost have like this growth mindset of figuring things out. I think obviously mechanics kind of leans itself to that as well, having to problem solve. And do you think that's something, because we have a lot of people listen are a little bit younger, trying to figure out what they're interested in, their career paths, their kind of where they want to go with their lives. And is that something like that growth mindset or even that problem solving mindset? Do you think that's something you are kind of born with, or is that something you can develop over time, or what's your thoughts on that?
No, I definitely think it's something I mean, obviously there's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But I think it's a skill that can be learned.
Yeah.
And developed. Remaining stagnant in just one thing is, of course, boring.
Yeah.
For one thing.
Yeah.
But it's not what we're here to do. It's not the who we're expected to become.
Yeah.
As far as in a faith journey or even in a mortal journey.
Sure.
So yeah, absolutely. And I think anybody can learn to do new things, as long as do you expect them to, or do you expect to do everything perfectly the first time, when you're doing something new? Obviously not.
Yeah.
There's things that need to be practiced and learned.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big thing to keep yourself engaged.
Yeah.
And not only, in your community or whatever, but mentally engaged in what you're doing. And there does come a time, I'm sure, when actually you start developing new interests because,
right.
Some things you've not that you've necessarily learned everything you can learn about them.
Yeah.
But it opens a door that
right.
maybe you see something else that comes along that says, oh, that, and then you can make a connection between the two. Like the reason I probably got started or looking at the 3D printing was because I was really more interested in woodworking.
Okay. Yeah.
And was watching some videos of people who had bought 3D printers to create jigs for their woodworking.
Mm.
And so then I started watching more 3D videos or printing videos, and not only by woodworkers, but by, mechanics and things like that who are actually using them in their own place of work.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of snowballed from there.
Interesting. Okay. So you were looking at like woodworking stuff, and then that led to kind of discovering 3D printing, which led to then going, hey, I kind of like
I can
that.
actually use this here, and, or, I can still use it in the woodworking side of it too.
Sure.
Haven't done it yet. Because my woodworking shop is in my garage and it's cold in the winter time.
Cold, yeah. Yeah, that's not really the ideal time to work in there.
No.
So you also, I know you mentioned, and I knew this before as well, but that you built your house basically, I guess remodeled,
yeah,
but there was quite a bit of...
It was a full gut.
Yeah.
That. It didn't turn out to be that way. It didn't start out that way. But the deeper we got, and it being a 50-plus year old house, you got into it and found that, the electrical system needs an upgrade, the plumbing needs an upgrade, the insulation needed an upgrade.
Yeah.
And it's pretty soon what started out as just let's see if we can finish the basement because our family was growing.
Right.
And suddenly we got in there and realized that if we're going to do it, we might as well do it top to bottom because we didn't want to have to do it again.
Right.
But that turned what we naively thought, and that was one thing about it. I was pretty well full of, HGTV and naivete when I started this remodeling project, thinking, because on HGTV, it's always 30 minutes an episode, and they got this whole project done. But what started, we thought maybe a 6-month finishing the basement turned into 3 years.
Yeah.
And so, but in that process, learned a lot of new skills, basic framing and electrical and insulation. Did all my floor work. Did the tile. Mm-hmm. Did not hang the drywall. Those guys do it very quickly and very well. And after 2.5 years of trying to do things myself, I didn't want to spend another 5 months trying to hang my own drywall and learn how to texture and things like that. Whereas the crew comes in and they're done in a week or two.
Yeah.
So,
was there any because that's quite an undertaking. I think some people will look at that going like, I wouldn't even know where to start. But was there any like horror stories, like any as you were going through it, some things you were like that went awry, or any stories that you can tell from that experience?
Probably just the feeling that like demo never ended because, like I say, we started out with just wanting to do the basement, and so and we have a story in our family that that then became the broken house because we weren't living there, right? And my wife started. When we started talking about doing the basement, she's the one that went down there first and started pulling down some of the old tile off the ceiling, the acoustical tile. Yeah. And as soon as I got home from work that night, she hadn't told me she was going to start that day, but I get home from work, and I think it was my oldest daughter come down and says, "Daddy, Mommy broke the house." And so from that point on, it became, this was the broken house. The broken house. For 3 years. And we don't call it the broken house. It's not the finished house yet. There's still a couple of projects that need to be wrapped up, but... I
guess broken house has a kind of a dual meaning if people don't know.
We were broke. Yeah. It broke me physically. It broke me mentally, spiritually. No, it was a good experience. Same kind of one of those things where, learned enough to know that, I probably don't want to do that necessarily again. Yeah. But as it comes down to need to do other projects to maintain, I don't have any issues with trying to learn something new. Even if I don't know how to do it right off the bat, man, YouTube's a great resource.
Yeah.
So you learn a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, there's so many things you can just look up there. I looked up how to change my head. You know, you'd think like, oh, my car is kind of random. I wouldn't find a video tutorial on that car. Nope, it's right there.
It's all out there. You can find about anything out there. Really can.
It's pretty crazy how that works.
Yeah.
Was there anything looking back after finishing, you know, because obviously a 3-year remodel / finish the house, you know, you're kind of anticipating, constantly working through it. And what was that like? Were you just, I mean, you obviously were working still full time here in the business. Were you just finding time on the weekends, after hours? How did you fit it in?
Yeah. I would finish up here at 6 or 7, and then go over to the house till 10, or a little later maybe, and then weekends was all day. You mentioned about looking around and say, I don't know where to start, and there was a lot of that. I mean, we'd tear down something and look in there and say, no, what's the next step? And a lot of times it was just, well, let's clean up the mess so that we can see what the next step is.
Right.
But, yeah, and it can be a little overwhelming, especially when you're trying to do it yourself. But if you can just kind of go step by step, and then I a couple times got a little bit ahead of myself, thinking of what I wanted to do. A bigger project I knew I could do pretty easily, like insulating.
Yeah.
And so I went out and promptly bought a bunch of insulation.
Yeah.
But I wasn't nearly ready for it.
You're right.
So the rest of the project, trying to frame walls and stuff downstairs, I'm constantly moving around these big bags of insulation. So, the contractors and, that getting, they really know how to process it, to streamline that so you're at the right step at the right time.
Right.
Those are things you learn. It's like, well, I shouldn't have bought this yet.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, just one of those things that you find out later. What was, is there anything looking back? Because obviously it's probably pretty gratifying. Now you walk in, you're like, I built this thing. Yeah.
I spend a lot of times, talking to the kids, like, who did this? Who scratched this? Or whatever. And because, and it's not just the monetary investment. There's that part of it, but it's just like, I probably didn't see my family more than, waking hours more than 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
At that time.
Right.
And, for those 3 years. And so, and right or wrong, that, like I say, that doesn't necessarily say this is a place your family as the priority, but at the same time, I'm trying to get the place done so they can come move back in and be in a better living situation than where we were at the time.
Right.
And, we were in a cramped space and just trying to get it back. But yeah, there's definitely a sense of pride, in things that we accomplished. And even now with, you find out that being a homeowner is vastly overrated.
Yeah.
Because there's always something to work on.
Yeah.
And so, now the inside's decent-ish, but the outside needs to be painted and, we need a new roof and there's just always something.
Yeah. I was talking to, I don't know, I think it was maybe Kel the other day about, cause I was having to fix a few things around the place that I live. It's not my house, luckily, but he's not there as much. He's usually in Texas. And so I have to fix some stuff, or I was fixing my car and I told her, I was like, at one point, like a few years back, I kind of not resented, but it was like an extra thing to do. But then eventually you're kind of like, okay, I got to take care of this. I'm okay with that. I did this. I did that. And
it's a maybe a little out of your comfort zone, but hey, you can fix the other one. So, move on to the next one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it is true where it's like, I think some people hear the idea of running a business or owning a home or owning a dog or whatever it was. Right. And I have a horror story of my puppy I gave away after 2 weeks because I couldn't take it. But then like with the reality of what it means to really take care of the home or, own a house or start a family or own a business, like there's a lot of realities that are just at the baseline hard work and dedication to it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you speak Russian and obviously that's like one of the harder languages to learn.
I felt like it was a hard language to learn.
You did?
Yeah, for sure.
How did you learn that? I know you went to Russia for 2 years on your mission, and tell me a little bit about that experience. And I mean, I'm just curious about that.
Language wise, I think I was fortunate in that learning to read it came pretty quickly.
Okay.
Because obviously Russian uses a different alphabet than what we use in English. So, I think it's a little intimidating. I don't think now I would think it can't be nearly as intimidating as trying to learn like Mandarin Chinese and learn those characters and stuff,
I have a couple buddies who learned that, and I was like, I don't know how you guys did that.
Right. And so, but Russian is a challenging language. I mean, it's very different from English.
How many characters in the alphabet are there?
33 in the Russian alphabet.
Okay.
A couple of which don't even make sound, so, but they affect the sound of the letter they're next to.
Gotcha, like a silent letter or something.
Kind of, yeah, just slightly affects the pronunciation of other letters. But where in English we would use like two letters like SH to say a sh, in Russian it's one letter, makes that sound. But there's two letters, there's one that's sh, and then there's sh, which to us sounds the same thing, basically.
Yeah.
But if you were to write it out in English letters, instead of SH, it'd be SCH. Not like school, but more of a sh.
School, okay, yeah.
It's more guttural or something.
Yeah.
But it's not just the letter, like I said, because learning this to read really came pretty quickly. I mean, we're in the MTC for 2 months, before going to a foreign country. And I could pretty comfortably read before I left the MTC.
Oh, really? Okay.
So at least when I got in the country, if I didn't know what a word was, if there's a sign or something that had, I could at least look it up in my dictionary and see what it was. And understanding, and I was really self-conscious a lot about not just speaking Russian, but speaking Russian correctly.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of grammar rules in Russian, and different than, at least as an native English speaker, you just grow up. Yes, you're taught, certain correct grammar.
Right.
But mostly it's just you just pick up learning whatever people around you are saying.
Right, kind of your local slang or how they speak. Yeah.
And so, but as learning this, I was very self-conscious about speaking correctly. Russian has different cases, what they call cases, that the form of the word changes depending on whether you're saying he or she or it.
Oh, kind of like a conjugation in Spanish
Conjugation,
or something.
exactly. It just changes. And so the spelling changes, and it's not like just learning the word itself, is always spelled itself.
Right.
But in Russian, the spelling of a word changes depending on whether it's a verb or a noun, and whether they are the subject of the sentence versus the object in the sentence.
Oh. And
so there's just a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And that took a while, to feel. And I know even leaving, I didn't speak, perfectly everything. It was just so many letters, so many words, and a new language to learn.
Right. Did Russia, and depending on where you were, did they have kind of their own slang or how they speak?
They did. Not so much that I ever noticed in like dialect, like if you're here in the States and somebody who's from Tennessee or the Southern drawl kind of a thing.
Right.
Didn't really translate there.
Yeah.
Into that same, but then maybe it was just limited to the areas that I served in.
True.
Because I wasn't all over the country. I mean, I was in basically 2 different cities.
Right. I wonder if I mean, I don't know what the cultural dynamics of Russia are, but like here in the States, we have so many different ethnicities and cultures. I think we get a lot more, like the black community has slang and the culture of speaking that they speak versus the white community has a different culture versus the Hispanic community has kind of a different way of speaking.
Sure.
So I don't know what is the makeup of Russia. Pretty much everyone's Russian, or is it
where I was at for the vast majority? I mean, there were, and at that time, of course, this is 35-ish years ago. So for the most part, it was white, Slavic ethnicity. In those areas. Once in a while, you'd see somebody who was maybe from Georgia or, one of the southern old Soviet republics.
Right.
Who, maybe have a darker skin tone.
Okay.
Very seldom did you ever see somebody of, African descent.
Sure.
If you want to talk about racial relations, though, I mean,
is it pretty tense there?
It's pretty, especially for anybody from African descent.
Really?
I mean, it's you think we got it bad here. It's like, you have no idea.
Really?
So hopefully it's better there now.
Right.
But just huge discrimination.
I see. Is that just because there's so few? It's such a
I'm sure it's
minority?
both, it's just, the odd person, that you see.
Right.
They're different than you. And not always a great incentive to get to know them, or,
right.
It's the bias that you've grown
Sure.
up with,
Right.
Which we have that here, it's changing, but, different generations have, different biases depending on what they grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as a whole, I mean, we do okay here in the States.
Yeah.
Compared to other places.
For sure.
That I've been, not that I've been everywhere,
but definitely. Yeah. What was it like when you found out you're going to Russia? Because I would assume coming from Idaho, a small town, and then like other side of the world, and
well, interestingly, it was.
Sorry, are we recording on this audio? Okay.
It was awesome. I mean, I was so excited when I opened my mission call, because I mean, my siblings who had all served missions prior, I'm the youngest, and you see kind of where they go. I mean, we had a couple go to South America, and a couple stayed in the States, and one went to Asian countries.
Who went to South America?
Greg and Sherry.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Both went to South America. And so you kind of think, well, I'll probably hit something like that, you know. Church was growing quickly in South America, particularly, and probably in the Philippines and stuff. I mean, we've seen a lot of changes there, and even now, fast growth. But there was definitely part of me that's kind of like, I always kind of felt like Europe would be kind of cool, be different, It was like I did always wanted to serve for, and I wanted to learn language,
right?
And so when I opened up my mission call and found where it was, I mean, that was still, like say, it was early 90s, but very shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain and everything.
Yeah, that would have been early 80s-ish, right?
No, late 80s,
late
like 89.
80s. Oh, okay, so so really close
88,
to that.
89 was when things really started to change there.
Okay.
Because, prior to that, you would have thought, oh, there's no way that,
right.
The church is ever going to have missionaries in Russia.
Yeah.
Especially during, like, the Reagan years.
Right.
I mean, until, like, the very tail end of Reagan's administration, that you could kind of see the cracks developing, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But, it was, when I opened up the call, I mean, it was emotional, and a feeling that it still comes up inside me.
Yeah.
When I think about it, opening my call that morning and reading not wanting to skim through the call to find out where it was. I mean, I started at the top and I read.
Yeah.
And just until I finally came to it. And and it was something I was grateful for. I'm still grateful for. The experiences that I had, the people that I met, things that I learned as far as not just the language.
Yeah.
Serving others, of course, I mean, that was something we grew up as a family, was not a new thing to learn about serving others, but, finding happiness in whatever your circumstances are.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you've been there. I mean, mission's hard.
Yeah.
And especially maybe, I don't know whether it was harder at that time, definitely different.
Sure.
Just because, we called home twice a year.
Right.
No email, and the mail was very slow. I mean,
right.
Where I was at, I was fortunate enough I would get letters fairly, maybe within a week or two.
Sure. Yeah.
After my parents had written them.
Mm-hmm.
But excuse me, the mail going back the other way was usually about a 6-week lag.
Really?
So they're getting, mail that's happened to me 6 weeks ago.
Right.
And then I'm getting stuff that's, they're responding to that I wrote 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so, and still being young, 19 at that time, and being that far away from home, it was a hard transition. The first,
probably a little isolating in some ways.
Yeah. And, there's the homesickness. There's all those things that every missionary experiences, but it's good. I think that, you learn resiliency. Mm-hmm. You have to rely on something more than you.
Right.
You have to learn to rely on God and on Heavenly Father as the Savior. Because, you got your companion and, things like that most of the time, of course they have been there maybe a little longer than you, at least at the beginning, and, can kind of take the lead when you feel unsure and whatever.
Yeah.
But that doesn't last forever. So, you've got to, learn how to trust in the Savior and in his plan, his timing, why you're, in an area where maybe things aren't going as well as you'd hoped.
Right.
Getting as much success, but it balances out, sometimes it gives you more where you don't expect it.
Yeah.
And, you learn how to see him in his involvement in your life.
Yeah.
On a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that, as far as that I come home with, and then I still have a deep love for the Russian people, for the country. Parts of me I wish I could go back. But the dynamic now, the relationships between the countries is a little more strained.
Sure.
Which is sad. I see, whenever you leave a place, you always kind of leave it with that last memory that you had.
Yeah.
And then as things change, I did go back about 5 years after I come home from my mission and was amazed at how things were different.
Really?
In Moscow.
How did it change? Like a different how?
When I was first there, honestly, my first impression was, really, this is the capital of a major country, It was dirtier than where I was from. Not that we have dirty cities here in the States too, but here in Idaho, we're breathing fresh air and we're breathing, seeing blue sky. And first landing there on the airplane, the runway was not very smooth, it was a little bit bumpy, and
a few potholes. I
looked across out the windows we're going in, and what seriously looked like it was an airplane hangar, but it looked like a rundown shack.
Yeah.
Probably, I'm sure not their only one, but just the one I saw. And so that was the first impression.
Right.
And, but then, you grow to love the country, the people. And so as far as changes when I went back, that 5 years was a big difference. It definitely felt like more of a major European capital.
Oh, so
as far as aesthetically, they had taken a lot of they got amazing architecture there. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Of course, the old stuff that goes back into the a couple thousand years almost.
Yeah.
The Russian Orthodox churches. St. Basil's Cathedral on Red Square.
Yeah.
The onion domes that people are probably most familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of other really cool architecture, particularly in which I didn't serve there on my mission, but in St. Petersburg, where I visited after. Much more European influence, French influence and stuff like that from the 1700s.
Right.
And just amazing. But in Moscow, the big difference was that they'd taken all these very grand buildings that they'd built during the Soviet era, and now they've lighting them at nighttime, with the architectural accent lighting and stuff, and just makes it feel much more of a first world nation than the third world that I thought that I was flying into when I first landed.
Do you think it was because it had more time to westernize?
I think so. At that time, I think it was just because they were, just coming out of command style economy, Soviet style economy, trying to transition into some form of capitalism that they were comfortable with, which has been a struggle for them as far as, because the power vacuum that you hear, power hates a vacuum. And so
Right.
you get other elements maybe coming in that kind of swoop in and aren't necessarily a great influence.
Right.
So they struggled with that, seems like to me over the years. But yeah, as they became a little more open to the Western society and then, I'm sure wanting to, create a better impression, kind of taking some of those cues, those aspects. I mean, the subway in Moscow is amazing and just always was. Just the mosaic tile and just things like that. And it's just, and the engineering accomplishment to me was an amazing thing because, I mean, some of those subway stations, I mean, we were riding escalators that were really, really long. Really? Going down really deep in certain areas of town. Others were actually up on the surface, where the railway station was. Most was down deep and just how it all interconnected with, different lines that would cross, and you have certain stations that you, like say, learning to navigate the underground, the metro, the subway was interesting. Yeah. But like I say, just a really cool engineering thing.
What was, because I think we hear on the news about Russia quite frequently, and especially now, but it doesn't really give you a good depiction of the people or what their lives are like or just the culture in general. Mm-hmm. What are the people like? What were they like to you? What were the dynamics and just what was that experience?
I had nothing but a really good experiences. Yeah. A couple other missionaries, for whatever reason, just seemed like they just had the bad luck, because I know one missionary whose apartment was broken into and he lost everything like 3 or 4 different times during the 2 years that he was there. Really? That never happened to me. There was always, you had to be smart as far as not draw attention to yourself. That's one thing that they always told us, just try to, engage people, but don't be loud and don't be this loud American, throwing your, here I am.
Here's my American. Yeah.
Here's my Americanness.
Waving your flag around. And
so just, try to blend in that sense. But every place that I served, people were just very warm and engaging. Never felt like discriminated or anything but, accepted. Yeah. Many people thought I was Russian as far as just my overall appearance. Yeah. And so, like I say, that's why it wasn't hard to blend in. Yeah.
Got a nice Russian beard right now.
Right now, I'm sporting it, but couldn't then. Right. I wasn't encouraged then, but as far as the people, man, just like I said, that's part of where I guess the love for them comes from, is because they loved me first, or at least in return. Yeah. And I hope that that's one thing that showed me that it really doesn't. It's governments that are enemies, really. Right. And then, of course, as we get information from our governments, we develop an opinion or a bias. Yeah. But we're all children of God. Right. And that's why you're there as a missionary, is to help people learn that and learn what is, the meaning of life. Right. But, you can find good people everywhere. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's the bad apples, but, actually I nothing but good memories of the people that I knew there. Yeah. And hopes that things are still going well for them. Yeah. Haven't really stayed in touch well with the people that I knew, which is my fault, I guess, more than anything. It's but life kind of happens. Either you can say you get busy, but there's a lot of. It's still a choice, to involve people in your life, and that's, I guess, something that even you learn now is, the people that you want in your life. It takes effort to cultivate that,
absolutely,
and to show them that they're important. Yeah, and not just assume that they're always going to be there.
Right.
So,
yeah, I'm curious about you mentioned learn to be happy wherever you are or in whatever circumstance you are. Because I think it's so true. Like, you know, you can have a really good life or experience, and you can find the negatives in it, or you can find the positives in it. But there's nothing perfect. Yeah. Where did you pick that up? Was that something you learned on your mission? And then how has that been applicable since then? Like, how's that lesson served you?
It was something that I really, first kind of gained a greater appreciation, or at least an understanding that I could control, what I was feeling at a moment, even in hard times. The story that first comes to mind is I had a companion from Finland who I love. He's just a great person. Have had a chance to see him a couple of times since my mission, and talk over social media and stuff. But the experience I remember having with him one time, we were out fairly late. And we were trying to get to our apartment, and as missionaries there, you're only using, well, for the most part, you're using public transportation.
Sure.
We could occasionally catch a taxi or something like that, but it was, honestly, we were out later than we were supposed to be. Just with public transportation, sometimes you just missed things.
Right.
And so we were on it'd be the type of transportation we're using this time. They have buses, and they have electric buses, and of course they got the subway, but then they also have trolley cars, basically like you might see in San Francisco.
Right.
That do a lot of the surface streets. And so we were at a station waiting for one of these cars to come, and it was later at night. The schedule was pretty hit and miss. Not anything you'd really count on. Even during the day, it wasn't always something you could count on.
Yeah.
And so we thought, well, rather than just stand here waiting for the next one to come, let's kind of walk to the next station. Just follow the line and walk to the next station. And we were in an area where there was a very large park inside of Moscow called Izmailovsky Park, and it's what they call a forest park. So lots of trees. It's not like lots of green grass and like Central Park or something like that. It's mostly you feel like you're in the forest basically. Right. Not necessarily closed in with lots of ground brush and stuff, so you can still see where you're going.
Right.
But it's big trees and it's like a forest.
Huh. That's cool.
And with some trails and stuff, but we were following our train line to the next station, and we were more than halfway to the next one, but not really close.
Yeah.
And then we hear the train coming up behind us. And so we both knew that my companion's like, "We gotta run, Elder!" And so we start running. It's basically wintertime. I'm wearing this huge, heavy overcoat that I brought from home.
Yeah.
I felt like my feet were in quicksand. Is that kind of, the dream that you have when you can't run? That's what it felt like. And he's not wearing a big overcoat like that. And he's also like, over 6 feet tall, these long legs, and he just takes off without me. And the thing because I was kind of in a grumpy mood. Maybe I was hangry, who knows, because it was late at night, but I'm watching him run ahead of me, and I'm trying to catch up, and it's just not working. And the train actually went by us, and we weren't too far away at this time.
Yeah. But
it went by us, got to the next station, but I'm probably 50 yards behind him.
Sure.
And I look up, and he's running with his hands just high up in the air. He's like, "Yeah! Yeah! This is awesome!" And I just busted out laughing. And it was, like I say, because even though I was cold, I was tired, I was hungry, we were out late, and we still had a ways to go once we caught the train to get to our apartment. But, that just changed my perspective of, you can find happiness in even those weird, absurd moments.
Yeah.
And, it's all really, it's in you, it's in your control.
Yeah.
And so basically it's just that, how is it applied going forward? It's just remembering, that when things feel like, you're in a desperate situation, or just you feel miserable.
Yeah.
That is really not what we're here for. To find misery, we're here to find happiness.
Right.
And like President Nelson says, I'm going to paraphrase, but the happiness you have in your life doesn't depend on your circumstances, but on your focus,
Right.
basically. So it comes from in you.
Yeah.
And, like I say, I wish I remember that quote better, but that was the gist of it.
Yeah. No, I think that's, I think that's a great story of that, because I think too often we live in especially now in this generation, social media, everything that you see online, telling us that we should, that our feelings are controlled by others, and our feelings are controlled by what others say or do, or the circumstances you're in, and the
whole victimhood type of thing.
Yeah.
That drives me crazy. But yeah.
And it's like, even though those people who say that, blame others for their feelings are never happy and never have that happiness because they're allowing someone else to control and dictate it for them.
Yeah.
So I just think that's such a valuable lesson to learn. Because obviously you're a dad, you have, how many kids? 5 kids? 4? Wait.
Well, 4 of my own, 2 from
That's right.
my wife's previous marriage. But yeah.
And so what's that like being a dad? What lessons have you learned? Obviously, each kid is a little different, and
I don't know why, but man, none of them are like me.
Yeah.
I was so naive when I got married or planned on getting married. It's like, they always say the apple doesn't drop far from the tree.
Yeah.
What a bunch of hogwash. None of them are like me.
No.
Or at least, what I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, in certain ways they are.
Yeah.
But yeah, every one of them's different. None of them came with an owner's manual. And you've got to, it's a daily learning process.
Yeah.
But one that I'm most grateful for, I know that, the experiences that I've had in my life before now have brought me to this point, prepared me in the hope. I mean, maybe I didn't take advantage of every situation like I should have to prepare me as well as I could have been. But you look back and you can see that same thing of, if you don't put yourself on such a high pedestal that I need to know everything, that I need to be in complete control of this situation.
Right.
Be willing to, and that's one of the hard parts, is being willing, as far as being a father, being willing to accept the agency of my children in certain situations.
Yeah.
Which, as they get older, they need to have more of that. And, I still think it's step by step,
Sure.
You don't want to, throw them into the deep end,
Right.
even though they may want to be in certain things, and think they can handle it, but you just want to be wise.
Sure.
In your choices, at least, and try to involve Heavenly Father in that. But yeah, the family is definitely the best thing that's happened.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop talking about it now because I'm going to get emotional.
Okay.
But no, they're, like I say, love them. Love the things that I learn from them. A much greater appreciation for my own parents and the sacrifices that they made while I was growing up, that I had I had an appreciation for, but not as good of an understanding as what I do now.
Right.
By having my own family.
Yeah.
That you can't gain that, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
You can always say, I really appreciate and love what they did for me.
Right.
But until you're in that situation to where now you can then do that same kind of thing for the next generation.
Yeah.
It gives you a much deeper connection to the trials that your own parents must have had, trying to, raise this perfect child,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's been a great experience.
What would you say? Because I know you mentioned kind of this love for your parents, and even when your dad got sick or I can't remember what exactly happened.
I think that time he'd had a heart attack before, but I think this time was when he had colon cancer. So there are a couple different things he's dealt with in the past, but I think coming home from college, it was the colon cancer experience he was having.
Gotcha. So you mentioned coming home for them and the kind of out of loyalty, but also love for your parents and wanting to give back. And then now just mentioning there, kind of gaining a greater understanding for your, what would you say, like, now as a parent yourself, looking at your parents, what are some of those things that you've reflect on, those things that, you didn't know until you were a parent, going, oh, wow, I have a real appreciation for that?
Just, I guess, their willingness to really anything at the drop of a hat, to give up if I needed it. And like I said, it's not to say that I got everything I ever wanted as a child.
Sure. Sure.
Because no, I mean, they were very smart that way. But looking back and seeing, financial sacrifices that they made, to help me. I mean, I worked during the summers, to try and provide my own way through college and stuff like that. But they supported me on my mission.
Yeah.
So that anything I earned prior to going on my mission was there for me when I got back.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Helped me get a car afterward, it was just things like that were you maybe think, well, it's not a big deal. Parents just do that.
Sure.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Not all parents.
Mm-hmm.
And they never asked for it in payment in return.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they would have if, I tried to be a good kid, but maybe if I had been more belligerent about it, maybe they would have said,
right,
you're out of here, buy your own thing.
Yeah.
But, that and just probably a greater appreciation for maybe the sleepless nights that I'm sure that they had.
Yeah.
Didn't know it at the time, but have to, it's just part of being a parent.
Yeah.
That there's always, especially when, you start out with something that's just so small in your hands, and then they grow and get bigger. I mean, that connection, only intensifies.
Sure.
As life goes on. So looking now for, towards our next stage in life, got a couple kids that are out of the house and much more agency on their part now.
Yeah.
Much less that you can really do to step in and say, that's probably not very smart.
Right.
And, they have to live their lives. And you just hope that where they do make mistakes, obviously we all do, and they're gonna, you just hope that that they have experiences that they will learn from themselves, and hope that the things that, you tried to teach as they were growing up is something that they can draw upon, even if it's down deep, and not close to the surface or an active part of, their choices every day. That eventually, you trust that the Lord cares for them.
Yeah.
And he knows what path that they're on, and he'll provide.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned prayer and kind of the key role faith and Heavenly Father and plays in your life. And I'm curious, and you mentioned your mission where, you kind of you're out on your own, and you had to find, you had to lean on the Lord more in those moments. But you mentioned prayer a lot. Is there something or a time where that really rang true to you and you saw the power of, and it's probably over your lifetime, you've seen it multiple times since, but was there a time where it first kind of really hit you like, wow, the power of prayer and the meaningfulness of having the Lord in your life to guide you?
Like you said, I mean, there's lots of experiences that you can, would come to mind if you spent enough time to really review your life.
Yeah.
But when I think of maybe earliest experiences I had just with prayer, it would be as maybe a 6-year-old, family would go camping for a week at about 100 miles away or so from where we live, a place called Palisades Lakes, and we'd hike in. I mean, it was like a 12-mile hike back in to get to where we would go, and so it was you had to be prepared. And again, hats off to my parents for being willing to take 6 kids, and the youngest one being, 6 or 7 at the time, and pack horses and, haul food in and enough for a week for that many people. And just an amazing thing.
It's an ambitious trip.
And we did it for a couple years in a row that I can have memories of. But one year in particular, one of my brothers had a motorcycle, kind of a dirt bike that he wanted to take, and so they did. And I remember riding with him on the trail ahead of everybody else. And
this had to be Chris.
It was totally Chris. And we came to a fork in the trail, which, I look back on it and I probably think, Chris was probably just not concerned at all. But I think one of his comment was like, they don't know which way we need to go, so hop off here. And so, but for me as a 6 or maybe 7-year-old, it's like my older brother doesn't know which way we need to go, and he's leaving me here at the fork in the trail. Yeah. And, but always, and I wasn't like I was totally scared, out of my wits or anything. I knew he'd come back.
You think there's a ploy, they're just trying to get rid of it.
But, it's like, I just remember thinking, it's like, maybe I need to say a prayer. Yeah. To make sure that we can find, and I can't remember whether, I assume that everybody else must have been behind us just because we were on the motorbike, but he must have known which trail that ultimately we wanted to go to get to kind of where we'd planned on camping. Mm-hmm. And so, I did. I just knelt down there and said, please help us find where we need to go. Hmm. And not like earth shattering or anything like that. Sure. But that was, I think, one of the first times when I really remember thinking, I need to pray for this thing, for this, this concern that I have. Yeah. And that's where I need to, not just stand around, looking at the trees or whatever, waiting for my brother to come back. Right. For whatever reason. And so, and he came back and says, okay, it's this way, and off we went. Mm-hmm. So that's probably like one of the first things first experiences I remember having with prayer specifically. Yeah. Later on, even this probably applies more to the atonement, I would guess, than prayer and specifically, but it obviously involved prayer, but not one where I'm kneeling down and, arms folded and whatever. I had an experience here at the shop where a customer had come in and was pretty irate about something. I don't remember what it was now. And it's one of those situations where, of course you get defensive and after the situation's over, you just kind of keep replaying it over and over in your mind. Yeah. I should have said this, or that would have been a zinger if I had done that, or whatever, And that, of course, just leaves you with that knot in your chest, of how bad you feel and how, unfair that I guess that it was. It's like, it wasn't my fault, but, I was just the target that day. Right. Whatever. And I just remember, again, not kneeling down and closing my eyes and praying, but standing out in the bay, working on something else, trying to focus on whatever the next thing was, the next thing that I was supposed to be working on, and not being very successful. But it was more of a silent prayer or a conversation, like, Heavenly Father, I can't keep going over this in my head. Yeah. It's just I'm not feeling any better. I can't let it go. And I don't remember my exact words other than my feelings, but I do remember that as soon as basically I, had said to him, I need your help. I need to let this go. And it was seriously like the blink of an eye. Yeah. That as soon as I asked for that help, that weight, that knot in my chest was lifted. I mean, it was gone. Yeah. And I had no more animosity towards that person. Can't even remember at this point now who that person even was or what the situation was exactly, other than, like I say, I remember where I was, I remember the feelings I was having. Yeah. And to me, that was one of the most open and direct experiences that I have had with the atonement. which again seems like such a small thing, when you're talking about, I just was feeling bad.
Right.
But to me, that really shows that, God is in the details of our lives. He hears us no matter whether if we're in a car wreck and we're fighting for our life,
yeah,
or if we're just, had a bad day at work.
Right.
And that atonement, that infinite atonement applies infinitely.
Yeah.
In the biggest and the smallest things. So that, like I say, is one of and that's another one of those, maybe a touchstone moment where when I have feelings of, not necessarily doubt, but just, times are hard.
Yeah.
And you feel a little down or whatever. And you wonder if you're ever going to feel good again.
Yeah.
You go back and you hold on to those things. You pull them back close to you.
Yeah.
And remember how, even if he's not immediately lifting you up at that moment, he did then. And honestly, that memory is him lifting you up again. Hey, remember what I did.
Yeah.
I'm here for you now. So just remember, you can always feel that way.
Right.
With me in your life, with Christ in your life. So, that's, like I say, some of those experiences like that you have that you've got to be willing to not forget. Remember him always, kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's so true. It's just like it's the simple things, but simple things are easy to forget as well.
Right.
And if we can keep those with us, even like your point out, you can feel happy regardless of your circumstances. You can feel joy in, the worst and the best of circumstances. And, and it's kind of sounds simple. It's not always easy, but it's definitely accomplishable.
Yeah.
So, Dana, I guess I've had a fun time talking about all these different things. I've learned, even you being my uncle of my entire life, learning things new about you. And I guess one last question would be, for people listening, in your life of, kind of these adventures, mechanic, working with people, living in Rush for 2 years, raising a family, what would be maybe some advice you'd give your younger self? Coming up into the world, trying to figure it out, maybe even, you mentioned your kids are come to that age where they're making some of their own choices. What would be that type of advice you'd give them, looking back on your experience?
Making sure that the choices that you make, that you remember that they're not just in this moment. Everything has consequences down the road.
Yeah.
It may seem like something unimportant at the time, or at least minor.
Sure.
But you never know how that could be an inflection point. You've got to not only have a desire to do what's right, but keep your eye on what the end goal is. Because, growing up, did I figure I was going to be living in the hometown that I grew up in, doing what my dad did, basically? No, that was never where I thought I was going to be.
Sure.
But trusting that, just again, a step-by-step kind of a idea, line upon line, precept upon precept.
Yeah.
That the Lord sees the beginning, the end from the beginning, even when you don't.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I feel for my own kids, I think things are a lot harder now.
Sure.
Socially, the world that we live in, the standards, the things that they're exposed to, is a lot more challenging, I think, than probably it was when I was growing. At least it seems like it. I'm not exactly going through it with them, but I see what they're going through.
Yeah.
Having already reached a level of, stability or maturity where I'm comfortable and don't, not swayed by, things that I'm seeing going on around me.
Right.
Whereas they are still barely starting to, they're feeling the onslaught.
Sure.
But having the capacity to remain focused on,
right,
the end from the beginning, is hard for them. Basically, just don't give up. Trust what you feel, not what feels good. In that sense, because the adversary can deceive you into thinking that this feels like the right thing.
Right.
But if it's the loudest, most in your face, feeling, may not necessarily be from Christ.
Right.
He's much more subtle usually.
Yeah.
But also much more trusting of us.
Yeah.
To make our own choices and not force something on us.
Right.
So, if somebody's got some good advice for me, I'd happily take it, even at this stage in life.
Yeah.
So,
well, Dana, this has been a blast. I've learned so much about you, and I think people are really going to enjoy our chat and everything they learned about today. And if you're in Grace, come check out Centennial Lube.
Yeah, this podcast will get at least one view by me.
No, it'll get way more than that, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt.